All right, so I get to read the scriptures for this morning. And as we dive into Proverbs and we learn about wisdom, I think it's appropriate, especially as we are going into a summer season, trying to figure out budgets. And also summer's a great time for families as they're trying to figure out what are we doing for the fall, et cetera, et cetera. So, all right, Proverbs 1, it's 1 through 7. The Proverbs of Solomon, son of David, king of Israel. To know wisdom and instruction, to understand words of insight, to receive instruction in wise dealing, in righteousness, justice, and equity, to give prudence to the simple, knowledge and discernment to the youth. Let the wise hear and increase in learning, and the one who understands obtain guidance, to understand a proverb and a saying, the words of the wise and their riddles. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction. This is the word of the Lord.
Thank you, Louis. And as part of our Proverbs series, one of the things we're going to do this summer is we're going to work on memorizing together a proverb each week. And so kids, could I have your attention? I want you guys all look, maybe you could sit in your seats and look up at the screen for this time right now. We're going to work on memorizing this first proverb. So it's going to be Proverbs 1, verse 7. Could you pull that up for us? There you go. Thank you, Robert. All right, so we're gonna say this passage, this verse, a couple of times together, okay? The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction. Good, all right, let's try it again. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction. All right, the next slide is going to take some of these words away. All right, I'm going to try with you guys. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and knowledge. Instruction. Okay, let's try that again. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction. Okay, next slide, we're going to flip it. Ready? The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction. Good. One more time. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction. All right, I think the next one's blank. All right, can we do it? The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction. Good job. All right. So kids, I want you guys to ask your parents later today if they can quote Proverbs 1, verse 7, okay? And you guys can work on that together and maybe do that together. All right, kids, when we're thinking about, so we have all the kids together, and I want to do a lot to focus on you guys, and you've got your coloring sheet, which I'm going to reference a few times. But, you know, kids, when you look at a book, if you've ever been to a bookstore or a library, what are some of the things that you might expect to see on the cover of a book? What kind of ideas would be on the cover of a book? Okay, I don't know what he said, but that's probably on some book somewhere. What kind of things do they put on the outside of a book? Like, check out this book. What is this book about? It's about cookies. So what are some of the things? Yes. Okay, so the title. Yeah, what's the title of this book? It's Cookies. So this is a big, fat book that I borrowed from my daughter Rachel, because it's telling you all about making cookies. What's something else that might be on the cover of a book? Yeah. Pictures, yeah, that show a little bit about what the book's about, yeah. What else? What about a name? Like down here at the bottom, it says Von Vreeland. Who's that? What's he called? The author, that's right. And we've got on the screen here, that's the very first verse of Proverbs is the title and the author. In fact, verses 1 through 7, you could kind of think of them as like the cover of the book of Proverbs. So the title and the author, verse 1, it says, "The Proverbs of Solomon, son of David, king of Israel." So what is a proverb? So proverbs are brief, memorable observations about the way life normally works. Brief, memorable observations about the way life normally works. Now, it's really important to realize that proverbs are not promises. Right? You know, when we talk about, when we're going through the Bible, there's different genres of literature. You know, the Psalms are poems. They're poetic. You don't read a psalm as if you're reading a story, a narrative. It's poetic. It's artful language. Well, Proverbs are a genre. They aren't promises, but they're more like guidelines. This is the way the world normally works. You know, like here's a little proverb: drive carefully and safely, and you won't get into car accidents. Yeah, that's generally true. If you don't drive carefully, you're more than likely you're going to get into a car accident. But just because you drive carefully doesn't mean you will never get into a car accident. It can happen. Things can happen to your car or weather or somebody else. It's a proverb. It's a guideline. It's generally true. Or here's one, kids. If you listen to your teachers, you'll get good grades. That's generally true. If I ignore what my teachers say, then I'm not going to be able to get good grades. But I can do a really good job listening and still not get a perfect grade. Or here's one from Proverbs: diligent hands lead to wealth. Right? If I work diligently, I gain wealth. That's generally true. The Hebrew word for wisdom is hakma, and it's also translated in other parts of the Bible as skill. It's like the skill at knowing how to do something. So when God gave hakma to the men that built the tabernacle, you know, there was the skill to know how to do that. So wisdom is knowing how to do things. There's other words that, not just hakma, but all through Proverbs, like wisdom, instruction, understanding, insight, knowledge. All these things are synonyms. Wisdom also includes the knowledge of right and wrong, doing what's right, morality. And that gets us to our first point, kids. If you see on your sheet on the back, we got a little fill-in here. Wisdom is skill for life. You guys see the little fill-in there? Wisdom is skill for life. You can go to the next slide and it'll fill it in there, Robert. Wisdom is skill for life. I need it. It's skill at knowing what to do. And because you see on the sheet here, you've got a matching game. Do you guys see the matching game on the back of the sheet? And some of these things, it's going to take you some skill to figure out how to match these. In fact, kids, after the service, if you want to bring me your sheet, I'd love to see if you figured out all of these connections. But each of these are going to connect together, and some of these show some skill. Like it takes some skill to know how to fix something. Or how to, Mr. Robert, he's really good at fixing cars. He knows how to fix cars. That's a skill. It's knowing how to do stuff. And then verse 1 also gives us the author. Who's the author? It's Solomon. He is the king of Israel. He's the son of David, who was the very first king, or the second king in Israel. And there's a story in 1 Kings where Solomon is worshiping God, and he does a huge sacrifice to God. And then later that night, he's sleeping, and God comes to him. God is so pleased with his worship, and God says to him, "Ask me anything you want, and I'll give it to you." And Solomon says, "I want wisdom." And God was pleased with that answer, and so God gave him wisdom. And Scripture says that Solomon was the most wise man to ever live. God gave him wisdom. And that gets to us to our second point, kids. You got it on your sheet. Wisdom has to be learned. Wisdom has to be learned. The fill-in is learned. So we need to be learners. You guys know that when we were born, we don't know how to do anything. Right? We have no ability to do anything. We have to learn everything. It's kind of interesting that we're a unique being in all of creation, and that there are very little instincts for a baby when they're born, very few. But, giraffes, they're born and they can start walking pretty soon, and horses and cows and all. I mean, it's like amazing what animals God's programmed all this information and how they're supposed to work. But humankind are meant to learn. We've got to grow in our knowledge. And that's why, you think about, why is there a need for baby gates in houses? Emily and I were talking about it this morning. It's like little babies that are learning how to climb over those baby gates. Why do we put up a baby gate? Because they have no idea that they can't navigate stairs. Or we put baby locks on stuff because they don't know. And that's the reality of humanity. There's so much that we don't know. We have to learn it. That's why we need school. That's why we need training. That's why we need mentors. That's why we need coaches. It's all because we need help. All right, back to the book. We've got an author. We've got a title. What kind of information might be on the back cover, kids? What do we learn on the back cover? What might be on there? Yes. About the book. Exactly. What is this book about? You get a little description. And that's verses 2 and 3. Here's what Proverbs is about. He says, to know wisdom and instruction, to understand words of insight, to receive instruction in wise dealing, in righteousness, justice, and equity. And here we get more of those words for wisdom. Wisdom, insight, instruction, wise dealing. It also applies to morality because he says righteousness, justice, equity. How do we know what to do? How do we know which way to go? In whatever situation it is, he's talking about wisdom. So kids, are there things that you enjoy doing that you're getting better and better at? What's something that you enjoy that you're actually learning and getting better and better at? What about, does anybody enjoy reading? Yeah? And are you getting better and better at it? You're reading harder and harder books? You go from simple picture books to pictures with words to then no pictures in the book, which is, I remember as a kid, this is insane. How does that work? How is it possible for a book to be interesting without any words or pictures? And then think about sports. Does anybody play soccer? Or maybe an instrument? Swimming? Some people swim. Does anybody swim? You swim? And I know these girls swim, and you get better and better at it, right? We learn. And that's true of everything. And you guys, what's fascinating is that even the very best people in the world at things, they still have coaches. Go to the very best, see the very best soccer player, the very best football player, baseball player, the very best violinist, the very best singers, all of these very best skills. They all have coaches because we are always learning. These illustrations are helpful, parents or adults, when we're looking at children, because it's so obvious to see a child who doesn't know anything and needs to grow. But adults, this applies to all of us. We are all learning. We should all be lifelong learners because you truly never, even the things that you're excellent at, you never even fully master it. We need help. We need coaching. We want to grow. And there is wisdom in all things. I need wisdom in who my friends are and how I spend my time with friends, how I spend my time in life. I need wisdom in how I work. I need wisdom in how I use my money. All the things, I need wisdom. Okay, so then going on in the book cover, in the description, it's telling us what it's about, but then the book cover here is also telling us who it's for, right? So you go to a bookstore, you go to a library, and I need to get a book on how to do, build my deck. So it's for people who want to build a deck. I don't know if anybody reads those kind of books for fun. I would expect, Gates would probably just like, I'm interested in reading a book that I'm not going to do, but I'll read it. That's, it's for a particular group of people. And so he tells us who. Verses 4 and 6. He says, to give prudence to the simple, knowledge and discretion to the youth. Let the wise hear and increase in learning. The one who understands obtain guidance. And to understand a proverb and a saying, the words of the wise and their riddles. So there's three kinds of people he highlights here. First, he talks about the simple. And the simple are referenced throughout the Proverbs. The simple is the person who just doesn't know. They're not against wisdom. They're not for wisdom. They just don't know. That's most of the time the truth about children. They have no idea what they don't know. And it's not necessarily talking about young or old. If you don't know anything about a subject, you're simple. You need information. The first thing that came to mind for me is I remember visiting New York City with my family, and we got all our bags, and we arrived at the train station, came out of the train station looking for a taxi. It's late at night, but there's still tons of people in the street and cars, and there's this whole section of taxis. This is like before Uber. And this guy came up to me. He's like, you need a taxi? I was like, yeah, great, because I had no idea what I was doing. He helps us with our bags and try to find a taxi. And he's like, all right, give me the cash. I thought he worked for them. And he's like, here, let's put the bag in the back. And then he said, I'll talk to the taxi driver. And then I get in, and cash is gone. This guy had just helped us get our bags to the car, taken our $20 bill, and disappeared. Because I was simple. I didn't know how that kind of thing worked. I didn't know how you get a taxi in New York City in this mess of people. And I didn't know that there'd be people that would be there scamming me. But I was simple in that area, even though I was an adult. And I got scammed for $20. But that's some kind of people are simple by topic. And the next person he talks about is the youth. Youth. You are young, but you're also simple. And it's true that when you're young, you just don't know. And the reason is because you don't have a lot of experience. Because typically, you may not have been scammed in that way, because even if you haven't been to New York City in that situation, you got some other experience in life to know that, okay, there's guys that do that kind of thing. I'm going to watch out. But the youth have no idea. I have a memory of a video that my dad took of me, and I was maybe 10 years old. And we were at a lake in Denver in the winter, and the lake was frozen over, and I'm playing with rocks on the side of the lake, and then I start to walk out onto the lake, and he yells out to me to come back, don't go out on the ice. And then when I walk up, he said, don't go out on the ice, you could fall through. And I said, I'm not going to fall through. And that's the statement of youth. You have no idea. You have no idea. I'm not going to fall through. And that's just the way youth is. So he's saying it's written for the youth. And then the third group of people, he says, is for the wise, which that's interesting. Like, even if you're wise, you still don't have enough wisdom. Even if you're wise, you can get more wisdom. Even if you understand how to do something well, I can still grow in that. So he's saying it's written for the simple, the youth, and for the wise. James 1, verses 5 through 7 says, if any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask God, who gives generously to all without reproach, and it will be given to him. Guys, I think this is one of those simple passages where, like, if you're a Christian and you're like, I get it, I know. The challenge is when you face the decision of, I don't know what to do right here. And that is the point of the test of humility. Like, can I be honest about what I don't know to get help? The source of all wisdom is God, but he also provides wisdom through people. He says, but let him ask in faith with no doubting. For the one who doubts is like a wave of the sea that is driven and tossed by the wind. For that person must not suppose that he will receive anything from the Lord. So we need to have the humility to ask God for help. Because I don't know. I don't know what to do in this situation. And the other thing that's, I think, true in all of this, and you see this especially for the simple and for the youth is we don't know what we don't know. And so having some humility to allow somebody to tap on our shoulder and say, hey, you're not doing this right. Or can I help you? Our attitude should be, yes, I need help. I don't know what I'm doing here. Help me with this. And that really leads to the sad reality of Solomon, because even if you have amazing wisdom, you're the most wise person ever, that doesn't mean you're going to follow that wisdom. You can know it, that doesn't mean you're going to obey it. And that's the sad reality with Solomon, because later in life, he doesn't end his life well. Look at 1 Kings 11, verses 4 through 8. It says, "For when Solomon was old, his wives turned away his heart after other gods, and his heart was not wholly true to the Lord his God, as was the heart of David his father." And in the context of this, it makes clear that the law was very clear about who they should be marrying. He disobeyed what God had already told them about marrying these ladies that did not follow God. Not to mention the fact that he's marrying more than one wife. For Solomon went after Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Sidonians, and after Milcom, the abomination of the Ammonites. So Solomon did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, and did not wholly follow the Lord, as David his father had done. Then Solomon built a high place for Chemosh, the abomination of Moab, and for Molech, the abomination of the Ammonites, on the mountain east of Jerusalem. And so he did for all his foreign wives who made offerings and sacrifices to their gods. Which leads to the most important truth of all of Proverbs, which is verse 7. Verse 7 says, "For the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction." This is the foundation of all of Proverbs, the fear of the Lord. That's the third point. The fear of the Lord is the key to wisdom. Kids, you got your third fill-in blank. The fear of the Lord is the key to wisdom. This passage, this line, is repeated throughout the Bible. It's repeated in Proverbs. It's repeated in the New Testament, other parts of the Old Testament. And God is saying this is the key to wisdom. But before we get into that, let's note that there's actually a fourth person mentioned here. We already talked about the simple, we talked about youth, and we talked about the wise. But there's a fourth kind of person, and that is a fool. It says that the fool despises wisdom and instruction. Wow. Kids, anybody despise any kind of foods? Any kind of foods you're like, "Wah," spit it out right away? Like, "Oh, I don't like that kind of food." Yeah, you don't like some foods? Yeah, there's some foods where I'm like, "Ooh, that's disgusting. I don't want to eat that. I despise that." It's pretty wild to think that there's a kind of person that despises instruction, that doesn't want wisdom. It's easy to kind of think of it in terms of like, well, that guy over there, that's the worst, most unwise, foolish kind of person. But I think anytime I say, no thanks, I don't need your help. Anytime I'm not seeking what God would want from me, I think I'm being a fool. Because I'm trying to live and operate in a world that God made, in a world that He designed. He not only is the designer and the creator, but He's my provider. He is my redeemer. I should be oriented around, what does God want from me? What does God want from me? It's the key to wisdom is the fear of the Lord. And this is not a fear that is like terror kind of fear. It's reverence. It's reverential awe of who He is. He is God. He made everything. He knows when it's best. And so I want to obey Him. I think it's really common for us to think of God as, kind of like the jolly old Saint Nick Santa Claus, that He's just so nice and and approachable, comes around once a year and gives us nice gifts. Or we think of him as, like the genie in the bottle. It's like, I got a problem or I need to solve something. I'm going to go rub that bottle. Out pops the genie, solve all my problems. Now go back into the bottle, genie. I'm going to live my life. Maybe we think of him as like a butler who's going to make sure everything is set up for us and good to go and life is going to be smooth. He is the God of the universe. I love the way C.S. Lewis describes him in Chronicles of Narnia. Remember with Aslan? And Aslan is a lion. And Lucy, one of the characters, she finds out that Aslan is a lion. And she's scared. Like, I don't want to meet a lion. And she asks Mr. Beaver, she says, is Aslan safe? And Beaver's like, no. He's a wild lion. He is not safe. But he is good, which I just love that imagery because we often think about animals that we spend time with, like dogs and cats. They're tame. They're under us. They, for the most part, do what we want. Not a wild lion in the jungle. You don't tell a wild lion in the jungle what is going to happen, and that's the same with God. He is God. There should be a reverence and a fear. He is in charge, and I want to please him. And I think, sadly, that is what happened with Solomon, is that over time, the fear of the Lord begins to decline. I'm sure we can think of reasons why he married all those wives. But I think one of the reasons that he did, and it says it explicitly, I think, with the first wife that he married, that it was a political, decision. Where how do I lead this nation and keep them safe from this big empire down the south, the Egyptians? I will marry one of the princesses of Egypt. And then they do that. So that was a common thing in those days. It's like we're going to have a treaty through marriage. And because the daughter of the princess of Egypt now lives in Jerusalem, maybe the Egyptians will feel less inclined to come and wipe us out. So he's even operating a way that's not trusting God with their protection. He's trusting the world's way. He probably went to his advisors and said, how do we protect ourselves from Egypt? And they said, well, you could marry one of their daughters. Not wisdom. And then over time, the fear of the Lord declines and he starts worshiping these other gods. And I think that is an amazing contrast to the midwives of Jerusalem. Remember the Jewish Hebrew midwives? Remember in Egypt? Where they were growing all their numbers, and Pharaoh said, I want every baby that's born to be killed. He instructed all the midwives to do that, and the Hebrew wives said, no, we're not. They didn't say it, but they disobeyed the government. We're not killing these babies. And the leadership, the Pharaoh came to them and said, why? What's going on here? And they lied to the Pharaoh. And it explicitly says, because they feared God. And I think that's what's so incredible about the fear of the Lord is when we have the fear of the Lord, that's the key to interpreting all the decisions that we make. So in other words, it's not about just following a moral standard because they lied and disobeyed the government. I thought lying and disobeying the government's wrong. Well, if you're fearing God, then sometimes there's a time where, we need to not be honest, totally honest with the government, and maybe not obey what the government tells us to do. It's the fear of the Lord that was guiding that. And then finally, our last point is that Jesus is our example of wisdom. So kids, that's your final fill-in on the other side of the sheet. Jesus is our example of wisdom. Solomon failed to follow God perfectly, but Jesus followed God completely and perfectly. The Bible says that Jesus is the wisdom of God. It says that in him are hidden all the treasures of wisdom and knowledge. And there is one amazing story about Jesus as a boy. You guys know the story in Luke chapter 2. Jesus is a boy. And kids, you've got that on your page, and I think, we've got it there for the screen. Little picture here of Jesus in the temple. So he and his family, when he was being raised, like all the good Jewish families, they traveled to Jerusalem for Passover. The whole family travels to Jerusalem. And then the whole caravan then left town, and it was a day later before Mary and Joseph, his parents, realized that Jesus wasn't with the caravan, which is, I was kind of thinking, like, how is that possible? How is it possible as parents to just leave? Well, if you think about it, though, it's like kids play outside all the time. And can you imagine, like, if all of your neighbors, the entire part of your community is like, this is the time when we pack up, and this is the time when we leave. So it's easy to imagine that, like, we're all traveling together to go to Jerusalem, and then we're all traveling together to go back home. Well, Jesus got himself into the temple and was just fascinated about and just seeking God for wisdom. It says, after 3 days, they found him in the temple, sitting among the teachers, listening to them, and asking them questions. Don't miss that. Here's Jesus as a young boy. He doesn't know the answers to questions that he's asking. He's listening to what they're saying. And all who heard him were amazed at his understanding and his answers. And then later in Luke it says, Jesus increased in wisdom and in stature and in favor with God and man. Jesus as a boy had to learn and grow, which means that there's nothing wrong with needing to learn and grow. He's at the place where he can learn and grow. His heart is asking questions and listening to what's said. That's the thing that's so admirable about Jesus as a boy. And it says that he grew in wisdom and stature. That is incredible to think about. And unlike Solomon, Jesus' heart was never divided. He feared the Lord completely and fully. Isaiah chapter 11 says this about the Messiah. It says, "And the Spirit of the Lord shall rest upon him, the Spirit of wisdom and understanding, the Spirit of counsel and might, the Spirit of knowledge and the fear of the Lord. And his delight shall be in the fear of the Lord." That was his delight, was to fear the Lord. And I think from that place, now he's eager to get his questions answered. Like, I'm trying to follow God because I fear him more than anything else. I am in awe of him. And so I'm going to start following him and asking the questions, listening to the answers so that I know the right way to go. Guys, I think that we live today in a world of shortcuts and easy answers to everything. And I think that it is a great gift that we can pull out our phone and ask Google questions and get answers to things. That is awesome. That is great. But the knowledge and the wisdom that God has for us is not just about life hacks and shortcuts. Because the objective in life isn't our pleasure or our bank account or our status. Our objective in life is the fear of the Lord. It's what does he want from me? And it's the fear of the Lord that sets all of these other things in their right spot. Because I think, the world, I've got kids I've got on our matching game. We've got tools. There are a lot of non-Christians that are great craftsmen. We've got a piano and a music note on there. There are lots of non-Christians that are very skilled at music and on and on and on. You can go to a bookstore and find books on business, on real estate, on whatever your topic is, and you can glean wisdom and knowledge about that subject. But if you want to build a business and make lots of money, how do you know when you've made enough? How do you know when it's time to clock out and go home? How do you know when, that's wisdom. If the goal is just make more money, well, then stay later. Just make more money. Run over all the people that you need to run over to make more money. Wisdom is about following God because He's the goal. And Jesus did that for us perfectly. It is not about life hacks. It is not about shortcuts. It's not even about having all this intellectual wisdom like Solomon. It's not about what you know. It is about who you know. Because He's the one that I want to submit my time and my calendar to. He's the one that I want to submit my possessions, my money to. He's the one that I want to follow. He's the one that I revere, and I want to follow Him. Wisdom starts on our knees before Him. So we want to look to Christ, the incarnate wisdom, and ask Him to replace our pride and give us a humble desire to fear Him. Okay, kids, good job. You made it all the way through. We are gonna do the memory again. Can we have the verse up again? The fear of the Lord, everybody, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction. One more time. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction. All right, next one. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction. And then the next one, Robert. The beginning of fear of the Lord of wisdom. Fools despise wisdom and instruction. One more time. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction. Just trying to make sure you guys are on your toes. Okay, let's pray. Father, thank you so much that you make your wisdom and your knowledge and your instruction and your insight, you make it all available to us. You've put it in book form. You've put it in experience of other human form. Lord, you put it in the form of parents. You put it in the form of friends. Lord, I pray that you would just make us into a people that truly fear you and revere you in awe, so that we are seeking and wanting and desiring to grow in our wisdom and our knowledge. And thank you, Jesus, that you walked the entire path that we failed to walk, Lord. And all along the way, you consistently never despised wisdom, never despised instruction. We give all this to you.